Chapter 10 of Mary Louise in the Country by L. Frank Baum. Read for LibriVox.org into the public domain. Chapter 10 Ingua is Confidential. Ingua slowly resumed her seat on the bank beside her friend. It was hard to resist Josie's appeals. "The whole thing looks pretty black agin Gran'dad," she said. "I s'pose you can't understand what I mean till I tell you the whole story, from the beginning, 'cause you didn't live here at the time. If you lived here," she added, "I wouldn't tell you anything, but by and by you're goin' away, and you've promised to keep your mouth shut." "Unless you give me permission to speak." "I ain't likely to do that. I'm tellin' you this, Josie, so's we can talk it over at times. It has got hold o' my mind, somethin' terrible. Once I was goin' to tell Mary Louise, but she couldn't understand it like you can. She's different, and if Gran'dad ever hears that I blabbed I'm as good as dead, and I know it." "He won't hear it from me," promised Josie. "Well, Gran'dad was allus sly. I remember Mom tellin' him to his face he were cold as ice and sly as sin. Mom had a way o' sayin' what she thought of him, and he'd jest look at her steady and say nothin' back. She was allus tryin' to git money outer him, Mom was, and when he said he didn't have no money she told him she knew he did. She ransacked the whole house, and even tore up the floorboards, tryin' to find where he'd hid it. Her idee was that if he'd sold his land for a lot o' money and hadn't spent a cent, he must have it yet. But I guess Mom didn't find no money, and so she lit out. The day she lit out she said to him that he was too slick for her, but she could take care o' herself. All she wanted was for him to take care o' me. Gran'dad said he would, and so he did. He didn't take any too much care o' me, and I'd ruther he wouldn't. If I had more to eat, I wouldn't kick, but since Mary Louise come here and invited me to tea so often I hain't been hungry a bit." "Mary Louise likes company," said Josie. "Go on, dear." "Well, after Ann Kenton got married, her new husband come here, which was Ned Joslyn. I never took a fancy to Ann. She wasn't specially uppish, but she wasn't nothin' else, either. Ned made me laugh when I first seen him. He had one spectacle in one eye, with a string to catch it if it fell off. He had striped clothes and shiny shoes, and he walked as careful as if he were afraid the ground would get the bottoms of them nice shoes dirty. He used to set in that summer house and smoke cigarettes and read books. One day he noticed Old Swallertail, and he looked so hard at him that his one-eyed spectacle fell off a dozen times. That night he sent a letter to Gran'dad, and Gran'dad read it and tore it up, and told the old man that brung it there was no answer. That's all I knew till one night they came walkin' home together, chummy as a team o' mules. When they come to the bridge they shook hands, and Old Swallertail came to the house with a grin on his face, the first and last grin I ever seen him have." "Doesn't he ever laugh?" asked Josie. "If he does, he laughs when no one is lookin'. But after that day I seen Ned Joslyn with Gran'dad a good deal. Sometimes he'd come to our house and wait for Old Swallertail to come home, and then they'd send me away and tell me not to come back till I was called. That made me mighty curious to see what they was up to, so one day I crep up behind the house and peeked in the winder. They wasn't in the kitchen, so I went around and peeked through the winder o' Gran'dad's room, and there they both sot, and Gran'dad was countin' out money on the table. It must 'a' been gold money, 'cause it was yaller and bigger'n cents and nickels. Ned put it all in his pocket, and writ somethin' on a paper that Gran'dad put inter his big pocket-book. Then they both got up, and I made a run for it and hid behind the barn." "When did that happen?" asked Josie. "The first summer Ann was married. That was 3 summers ago, countin' this one. I was only a kid then," said Ingua, as if realizing she was now 2 years older. "And after that?" said Josie. "Last summer it was just the same. The two was thicker'n gumdrops, only Ned didn't go to the office no more. He allus come to our house instid. One day, when he was waitin' for Old Swallertail, he says to me, 'Ingua, how'd you like to be rollin' in money, and live in a big city, and have your own automobile to ride in, and dress like a queen?' 'I'd like it,' says I. 'Well,' says he, 'it's bound to happen, if Old Swallertail sticks to me and does what I say. He's got the capital,' says Ned, 'and I got the brains, and atween the two of us, Ingua,' says Ned, 'we'll corral half the money there is in America.' 'Will he stick?' says I. 'I dunno,' says Ned. 'He's got queer ideas about duty and honesty that ain't pop'lar these days in business. But I'm gittin' so now that I kin lead him by the nose, and I'll force him to waller in money afore I've done with him.' 'I don't see how that'll make me rollin' in money, anyhow,' I told him. 'The old man'll die pretty soon,' says Ned, 'and then you'll git the money I'll make for him. By the time you're growed up, if not afore,' says he, 'you may be the richest girl in the world. It all depends on how I can bend that old stick of a Gran'dad o' yourn.' That was the day he give me the $1, and Granddad came in time to see it, and took it away from me. It didn't set me up anyhow, that talk o' Ned's, 'cause I didn't believe in them brains he bragged on, or his being able to lead Old Swallertail by the nose. Granddad begun gettin' kind o' harsh with Ned, afore the summer was over, which showed he wasn't bendin' much, and at the last, just afore Ned went away, the big quarrel come off. It wasn't the quarrel Miss Huckins knows about, but it happened right here. They'd sent me away from the house like they always did, and I were layin' in the clover in the back yard, when there was a crash and a yell. I jumped up and run to the door, and the table was tipped over and a lot o' papers and money scattered on the floor, and behind the table stood Old Swallertail, white and still, and Ned pointin' a gun at him." "What sort of gun?" questioned Josie. "One o' them hip pocket sort, same as Jim Benton, the mailman, carries. Only Jim's ain't never loaded 'cause he's afraid of it. I ain't sure Ned's was loaded either, for when he seen me in the doorway he just slipped it in his pocket. "'Very well,' says Gran'dad, 'I knows now what sort o' man you are, Ned Joselyn.' An' Ned he answers back, 'An' I know what sort o' man you are, you old crag. You're a hypocrite through an' through. You preach squareness while you're as crooked as a snake an' as poisonous an' deadly, an' you'd ruin your best friend just to get a copper cent the best of him.' Gran'dad leaned over and set the table on its legs again. An' then he says, slow an' cold, 'But I hain't offered to murder you, not yet, Ned Joselyn.' Ned looked at him and kind o' shivered, and Gran'dad said, 'Pick up them papers an' things, Ingua.' So I picked 'em up and put 'em on the table, and they sent me away again. I laid in the clover a whole hour, feelin' pretty nervous and rocky, for I didn't know what was goin' to happen. Nothin' did happen, though, 'cept that Ned crossed the river on the steppin' stones, and half-way over he turned and laughed, and waved his hand at Gran'dad, who stood in the door and watched him go. But Gran'dad didn't laugh. He says to me when I come in, 'Ingua, if I'm ever found dead, you go to Dud Berkeley, the constable, and tell him to arrest Ned Joselyn for murder. D'ye understand?' 'I sure do,' says I. 'Guess he'd 'a' shot you, Gran'dad, if I hadn't come in just when I did.' An' see here," he went on, "unless I'm found dead, you keep mum about what you seen to-day. If you blab a word to any one, you'll get me in trouble, and I'll crush you as willin' as I'd swat a fly. Me an' Ned's is friends ag'in,' says he, 'but I don't trust him.' 'Does he trust you?' I asked him, and at first he just looked at me and scowled, but after a minute he answered, 'I don't know how wise the man is. P'r'aps he isn't a fool, but even wise men is foolish sometimes.' Well, Josie, that was all just then. Ned went with his wife Ann to the city next day, and things here went on as usual. Only Gran'dad begun to get wakeful nights, and couldn't sleep. He'd get up and dress and go outdoors and walk around till mornin'. He didn't say nothin' to me about it, but I watched him, and one mornin' when he come in I said, 'Why don't you git some medicine of Doc Jenkins to make you sleep?' Then he busts out and grabs me by the throat and near choked the life out of me. 'You spy, you dirty little spy,' says he. 'You keep your eyes shut and your mouth shut, or I'll skin you alive,' says he. The way he looked at me I was scared stiff, and I never said nothin' more about his sleepless nights. I guess what made him mad was my sayin' he orter have a doctor, 'cause doctors cost money and Gran'dad's so poor he hates to spend money unnecessary." "Did he ever again try to choke you?" "He tried once more, but I was too spry for him. It was a winter night, when it was cold in his room and he come inter the kitchen, where there was a fire to right. I sot behind the stove tryin' to keep warm, and after a time I seen him look up and glare at the bare wall a long time. By'm by he says in a low voice, 'For the cause,' and starts writin' agin. 'What cause are you talkin' about, Gran'dad?' says I. I guess he'd forgot I was there, but now he gives a yell and jumps up and comes for me with his fingers twistin' and workin' like I'd seen 'em afore. I didn't wait for him to git near me, you can bet. I made a dive out the back door and stood around in the cold tryin' to keep warm while I gave him time to cool off where the fire was. When he was writin' agin I sneaked in and he didn't notice me. When Marm was here she used to josh him about the cause, and oncet I heard her tell him she guessed the cause was hoardin' his money so's to starve his family. Marm wasn't afraid of me, but I am, so I never whisper the word cause while he's around." Josie sat in reflection for a long time. Then she asked softly, "Does he still walk at night, Ingua?" "Sometimes. Not so much as he once did, though. He seems to take streaks o' bein' wakeful," explained the girl. "Have you ever seen him come out or go in?" "Lots o' times. When it's moonlight I can see him through my window, and he can't see me 'cause my room is dark." "And does he carry anything with him?" "Not a thing. He just goes out like he does daytimes, and comes back the same way." Josie nodded her tousled red head as if the answers pleased her. "He's a very clever man, your grandfather," she remarked. He can fool not only his neighbors but his own family. But you've more to tell me, Ingua." "How do you know, Josie?" "Because all this is just the beginning. It is something else that has been worrying you, dear." Chapter 11. For more free audiobooks or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org.